The galaxy was plunged into chaos. An all-out war had ravaged countless worlds, each struggling to maintain its sovereignty against a powerful force. The Vryn, an ancient alien species known for their superior intellect and military might, were at the forefront of this conflict. They had easily wiped out entire civilizations with their advanced technology and ruthless strategies. Their war machines, massive fleets, and cutting-edge weapons had devastated planetary systems, and their warships patrolled the stars with an air of invincibility. One by one, powerful civilizations had crumbled beneath their assault. As the war wore on, it became clear that victory was all but assured for the Vryn. They had already conquered much of the galaxy, and their reach was extending further with each passing day. The galaxy's resistance had all but collapsed. Whatever forces remained were either overwhelmed or in disarray. Hope was fading, and the Vryn's dominance seemed unchallenged. Among the many planets caught in the crossfire, Earth had been overlooked. It was a small, relatively insignificant planet in a backwater solar system, still in its early stages of space exploration. The human race was primitive by galactic standards, struggling with technologies far behind those of the Vryn. But Earth was a target, nonetheless. The Vryn, having already defeated more advanced species, saw humanity as nothing more than an obstacle. They did not consider humans a threat. Earth was an easy target, a low-priority nuisance that would be easily swept aside in the wake of their other conquests. Their forces were vast, and Earth had nothing to offer that the Vryn hadn't already crushed before. Humanity's primitive technologies, primitive weapons, and fragmented defense systems were seen as laughable. The Vryn didn't waste much time analyzing the human race. They believed that eradicating Earth would be a mere formality. As the Vryn fleet approached Earth, they began their conquest without hesitation. Earth's defenses were weak and unprepared for such a superior force. Military leaders scrambled to organize a resistance, but they were severely outmatched. The few human fighters that could muster any form of defense were quickly overrun. It became apparent that Earth had no chance against the Vryn's overwhelming superiority. The Vryn advanced across the planet with ease, decimating any opposition that stood in their way. Yet, even in the face of certain defeat, humans fought. They had no choice but to resist. But their attempts to mount a defense were futile. They had no means of matching the Vryn's weapons, no advanced technology that could give them a fighting chance. The Vryn cut through human forces like a hot knife through butter. Their victory seemed inevitable. And yet, despite the hopelessness of the situation, the human spirit would not be extinguished so easily. The humans refused to simply accept their fate. They clung to the belief that there was more to their species than the Vryn could understand. Earth's last hope was not in its strength, but in its ingenuity. Humans had always been resourceful, able to create solutions out of nothing. But it would take more than sheer will to turn the tide of a war they were destined to lose. Yet, despite their limitations, the human resistance began to form. They were few in number and had no real technological advantage, but they possessed a unique quality that the Vryn could not comprehend, an unwavering determination to survive, no matter the cost. The resistance was small, a coalition of soldiers, scientists, engineers, and civilians who refused to bow before the alien conquerors. They could not match the Vryn fleet in size, nor could they fight the war using conventional means. Their weapons were primitive compared to the Vryn's, their technologies outdated. But the humans were willing to do whatever it took to protect their home. Their struggle would be one of desperation, but in desperation, there was also opportunity. As Earth's forces regrouped and reorganized, a glimmer of hope began to form. It was not in their ability to win through strength alone, but in their capacity to think outside the box. They could not defeat the Vryn using traditional methods, but they could use their environment, their creativity, and their resourcefulness to their advantage. The humans may have been a long way from the advanced technologies of the Vryn, but they possessed something that could turn the tide of this war, their ability to improvise and adapt to the most desperate situations. In the face of overwhelming odds, the humans would have to become unpredictable. They would have to fight in ways the Vryn had never anticipated, using the land, the environment, and their own ingenuity as weapons. The war was far from over, and despite the seemingly hopeless situation, humanity's relentless will to survive would set them on a path that no one, least of all the Vryn, could have predicted. The humans had been underestimated, but they would prove that even the most primitive of species could be the most dangerous when pushed to the brink of annihilation. As the Vryn relentlessly marched through Earth's defenses, the Resistance knew that they couldn't continue to fight the war in the same way. Conventional tactics had failed. Conventional weapons were useless against the Vryn's advanced military might. But humanity wasn't willing to give up. The human spirit wasn't one to surrender without finding a way to survive, and it was time to get creative. Instead of trying to match the Vryn's firepower, Earth's Resistance focused on guerrilla warfare. They began using their home planet to their advantage, exploiting the terrain and environment in ways the Vryn hadn't accounted for. The human fighters weren't just soldiers. They were engineers, scientists, and resourceful civilians who knew how to think outside the box. They started to build crude weapons, not in the traditional sense, but weapons that could catch the Vryn off guard. Improvised explosives, traps, and sabotage tactics became the primary means of defense. The Resistance learned quickly that subtlety was their strength. They couldn't take on the Vryn in open battle, but they could strike fast and hard, then disappear before the enemy could react. They targeted supply lines, ambushed isolated Vryn patrols, and attacked communication hubs. They used the element of surprise to level the playing field. The Vryn, accustomed to crushing every enemy they faced with their advanced technology, were unprepared for this kind of warfare. It wasn't just about power anymore, it was about adaptability. One of the first major successes came when a group of Resistance fighters, led by a seasoned military tactician, managed to destroy a Vryn convoy carrying vital resources to their forward operating bases. The convoy was heavily guarded, but the humans had set up a series of traps in a dense forest region. Using the terrain to their advantage, they laid explosives in key positions. As the convoy passed through, the humans detonated the charges, crippling the Vryn vehicles and forcing the soldiers to abandon their mission. It was a small victory, but it had a profound impact. For the first time, the Vryn saw that the humans weren't just struggling to survive, they were capable of inflicting real damage. The success spread like wildfire through Earth's Resistance. What started as a few isolated attacks quickly snowballed into a full-fledged campaign. More and more humans joined the fight, and Earth's Resistance was no longer just a desperate last stand. It was an organized force that was gaining momentum. As the Vryn continued to underestimate humanity, they failed to realize that the small victories were adding up. The Resistance was learning how to fight smarter, not harder, and they were beginning to hit the Vryn where it hurt. A crucial moment came when Earth's Resistance infiltrated one of the Vryn's communication centers. The Vryn relied heavily on their advanced communication networks to coordinate their attacks, but humans were now able to cut those lines of communication. By hacking into their systems, the Resistance threw a wrench into the Vryn's ability to mobilize their forces. It was another small success, but it was one that began to fracture the Vryn's strategic advantage. The Vryn were used to having perfect intelligence, but now they were blind, and it was costing them dearly. As the war dragged on, humanity's reputation began to grow. The Vryn, who had initially dismissed Earth as a trivial threat, were now questioning whether they had made a grave mistake. Reports came in from across the galaxy of the human Resistance's unrelenting tactics. They weren't fighting like any species the Vryn had ever faced. They were unpredictable, clever, and relentless. The Vryn had never encountered an enemy like this, one that didn't follow the traditional rules of war. They didn't care about formal engagements or honorable combat. They cared only about victory, no matter the cost. The humans' ruthlessness became their trademark. They began to fight with a vengeance, using the Vryn's own tactics against them. They didn't just seek to kill the enemy, they sought to destroy the Vryn's morale, to make them question their superiority. Every victory, no matter how small, was broadcasted across Earth's networks, and soon, the galaxy was starting to hear about humanity's triumphs. The Vryn were no longer seen as invincible. They were seen as vulnerable, and that vulnerability was growing with each passing day. It wasn't long before the Vryn began to take notice. Their once confident commanders started to send out orders to regroup and reinforce their positions. They were starting to feel the pressure. The humans were no longer an annoyance. They were a real threat, one that had disrupted the Vrin's perfect record of conquest. And that was something the Vrin couldn't tolerate. They prided themselves on their intellect, their ability to foresee and control every battle. But they couldn't control the humans. They had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. The human resistance had no intention of stopping. They had only just begun. The more they fought, the more they learned. They adapted, improved, and became stronger. The Vrin might have had superior technology, but they didn't have the same heart, the same drive, the same refusal to back down. And that was something no amount of advanced weapons could defeat. The humans' war was only just beginning, and the Vrin were starting to realize they might not win after all. The tide had shifted, and they had no idea how to stop it. The humans were ruthless, and now they were determined to make the galaxy know just how dangerous they could be. The tide of war began to shift in ways the Vrin had never expected. The more humanity fought, the more they began to realize the true potential of their underdog status. The Vrin, once considered untouchable, were now faced with an opponent they couldn't predict. Their arrogance had blinded them to the growing threat of human resistance. Every success, every small victory, began to chip away at their confidence. The Vrin had grown accustomed to being in control, but now they were reacting, scrambling to adjust to the unpredictable tactics of the humans. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Their technology may have been far superior, but the human mind was quick, creative, and willing to do whatever it took to win. The Vrin, despite their great intellect, couldn't match the sheer ruthlessness of the human spirit. At first, they thought the resistance was just a fleeting nuisance. A few isolated attacks, a few guerrilla skirmishes, but nothing serious enough to threaten their conquest. But as the human strikes became more coordinated, more sophisticated, the Vrin started to see a pattern. They were facing an enemy that was not only skilled but also determined to exact revenge for every loss. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for pride, for their very existence. And that made them a far more dangerous enemy than any the Vrin had encountered before. The Resistance's tactics became increasingly bold. They began launching coordinated assaults on key Vrin command centers. They took out power grids, disabled communication hubs, and crippled supply lines. It wasn't just about hitting the enemy, it was about making the Vrin feel vulnerable, making them second-guess their superiority. The Vrin had once prided themselves on their precise planning, their ability to anticipate every move their enemies would make. But the humans didn't play by those rules. They were unpredictable, chaotic even, and that chaos was starting to have a devastating effect on the Vrin war machine. The Vrin tried to regroup, to tighten their defenses. They sent reinforcements and shifted strategies, but each time, the humans adapted. They infiltrated their ranks, sabotaged their weapons, and attacked their most vulnerable points. The Vrin were beginning to panic. What had once been a one-sided war was now a fierce struggle, and they were no longer sure they would win. Meanwhile, the humans began to unite their forces, pooling their resources and coordinating on a scale they hadn't done before. They learned from each battle, refining their strategies, and making fewer mistakes with every engagement. They knew they couldn't win a conventional war, but that wasn't their goal. Their goal was to dismantle the Vrin's confidence, to expose their weaknesses, and to disrupt their entire war effort. And they were succeeding. The Resistance's efforts caught the attention of other oppressed civilizations across the galaxy. The Vrin had been ruthless in their conquests, but now they were seen as vulnerable. The humans had proven that even the most formidable enemy could be defeated with the right mindset. It wasn't just the weapons they wielded, but the resolve they displayed in the face of overwhelming odds that made them a symbol of hope for others. The news spread quickly. Smaller, less advanced species, who had once been under the Vrin's thumb, now saw humanity's success as a beacon. They began to rise up, launching their own attacks against the Vrin, emboldened by the human example. It was no longer just about Earth. It was a galaxy-wide rebellion against the supposed inevitability of the Vrin's rule. And it was all happening because humans refused to bend. On the battlefield, the Vrin's forces became more fragmented. They could no longer rely on their superiority to crush their enemies. Instead, they were forced into defensive positions, reacting to human attacks, rather than controlling the situation as they had once done. The humans, with their guerrilla tactics, were able to hit Vrin targets swiftly and then vanish before the aliens could respond. Their attacks were precision strikes, targeting key infrastructure, cutting off supply routes, and sabotaging vital systems. The Vrin's leadership was in disarray. They could no longer maintain their composure. They had underestimated the humans from the beginning, and now it was clear that their overconfidence had been their downfall. The human resistance was no longer a small force of desperate fighters. It had grown into a well-organized, formidable army. Their determination and ingenuity had turned the tide of the war, and the Vrin were realizing that the galaxy's balance of power had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer a matter of if the humans could win, but how soon they would win. The Vrin, in their desperation, began to question everything they had once believed. Their technology was supposed to be unbeatable. Their strategies were meant to be flawless. But against the ruthlessness of human ingenuity, they were faltering. And as the humans continued to outsmart them at every turn, the Vrin began to lose their grip on their empire. The Vrin had always seen themselves as the galaxy's ultimate rulers, but now they were being forced to retreat, to abandon territory they had once considered theirs by right. Humanity had shown them that even the most advanced species could be undone by something far more powerful: determination, adaptability, and the willingness to fight back against overwhelming odds. The Vrin were beginning to understand the true cost of their underestimation of the human race. They had underestimated not just their enemy's strength, but their resolve. And in that resolve, the humans had proven that they were no longer the insignificant species the Vrin had once believed them to be. Now they were a force that could change the entire course of the war. As the final battle loomed, the stakes had never been higher. The Vrin were no longer a force to be reckoned with. Their massive fleets, once a symbol of terror across the galaxy, had been decimated by the relentless human resistance. Earth, a planet once dismissed as inconsequential, had become the symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The tide had turned. And the Vrin, now cornered, knew they could no longer afford to underestimate their enemy. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, the Vrin launched an all-out assault on Earth. They were determined to crush humanity's resistance once and for all, to end the threat before it could spread further. They marshaled their remaining forces, preparing for an invasion that would overwhelm Earth's defenses. But what the Vrin failed to understand was that the human resistance was no longer just about Earth. It was about a galactic uprising. The battle for Earth was now the final chapter in a war that would determine the fate of the entire galaxy. The humans, though weary from the constant fighting, were ready. They had learned from every previous battle, refining their tactics and resources. They had studied the Vrin's weaknesses and had adapted their strategies accordingly. Their greatest strength was no longer their numbers, but their relentless drive and creativity. They had proven that victory didn't depend on advanced technology or overwhelming force. It depended on the ability to think differently and adapt in the heat of battle. Now, the human resistance had one chance to end the war once and for all. The final showdown began with a series of devastating counterattacks. The human forces launched surprise strikes on the Vrin's most critical assets, targeting their command centers, weapon depots, and communication hubs. The Vrin, caught off guard once again, found themselves scrambling to respond. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with force, but the humans had taken the fight to them in a way they couldn't predict. Each attack seemed to hit harder than the last, and the Vrin could no longer keep up with the barrage. They had underestimated human resourcefulness, and now it was costing them everything. The human resistance didn't let up. They continued their strikes, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Every victory, no matter how small, sent a powerful message to the Vrin: humanity was not going to surrender. As the battle raged on, the Vrin began to realize that they had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that their technological superiority would win the war for them. They had assumed that their strategic brilliance would be enough to crush humanity's spirit. But they had failed to account for one simple fact: humans were relentless. As the Vryn's positions weakened, their confidence began to crack. The once untouchable empire was now in full retreat. The humans had managed to dismantle their forces piece by piece, using unconventional tactics and brute force when necessary. The Vryn tried to regroup, sending reinforcements and attempting to rebuild their command structure, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted, and the Vryn were losing ground fast. In a final, desperate move, the Vryn launched an all-out assault on Earth's capital, hoping to crush the heart of the resistance. They believed that if they could eliminate the leadership, the rest of the resistance would fall apart. But they had underestimated the resolve of the humans. Instead of crumbling under pressure, the resistance fought back with renewed vigor. The final battle wasn't just a fight for Earth, it was a fight for the future of the galaxy. The Vryn's final offensive was met with fierce resistance. The humans, already battle-hardened and battle-tested, used every weapon at their disposal. They fought with everything they had left, refusing to allow the Vryn to take what they had worked so hard to defend. The battle was intense, with both sides suffering heavy losses, but it was clear that the humans had the upper hand. The Vryn, now retreating on all fronts, were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. In the end, the Vryn were forced to surrender. Their fleet was in ruins, their leadership shattered, and their once mighty empire had crumbled before the onslaught of human resilience. The war that had seemed destined for Vryn victory had ended in the complete collapse of their forces. The humans, with their ingenuity, resourcefulness, and relentless determination, had won the day. The galaxy would never be the same again. The victory was bittersweet. The cost of the war had been immense. Thousands of lives had been lost, and entire cities had been destroyed. But humanity had proven something far more important than their ability to fight. They had proven that even the most advanced civilizations could be brought to their knees by the strength of the human will. They had shown the galaxy that they were not just survivors, they were conquerors, and they would not be dismissed again. With the Vryn in retreat, the galaxy began to rebuild. The human resistance had not only saved Earth, but had also sparked a movement that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. The once dominant Vryn Empire was no more, and humanity stood at the forefront of a new age. The galaxy had learned a powerful lesson: never underestimate the ruthlessness of the human spirit. And with that, the humans solidified their place as one of the most formidable species the galaxy had ever known. The war was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. The galaxy would never forget the day the ruthless humans turned the tide of war and changed the course of history forever.